News journalist Amelia Brace and her cameraman Tim Myers were assaulted by US police during protests in Washington DC yesterday. Now, a call to action from our own Prime Minister. Here to bring us up to speed, 7 News presenter Angela Cox. Ange, what happens from here? What happens next?
Wasn't this extraordinary? So we have heard the Prime Minister wanting this to be investigated. Let's have another look at these pictures, all unfolded live on air. Amelia and Tim are there. Tim gets pushed with that shield, punched in the face. What's extraordinary, Amelia's running away and they hit her as she's running, obviously listening to what they're telling her and directing her to do. Just extraordinary sort of scenes. After the Prime Minister saw this, he's called for an investigation over in the US. The embassy here, the US Embassy in Canberra, released a statement saying freedom of the press is a right Australians and Americans hold dear. We take mistreatment of journalists seriously, as do all who take democracy seriously. We remain steadfast in our commitment to protecting journalists and guaranteeing equal justice under law for all. So this has got a lot of attention, as you'd expect, from international media, CBS, New York Times, CNN. Obviously, it's worrying when this sort of thing happens to one of our crews. What the bigger concern here, though, is that it's not just our crew. We saw a CNN reporter being arrested live on air. And this is not just a right of the media to be there reporting on this. This is our responsibility. It's really important that the world and the community sees what's going on in these situations. And you expect this sort of treatment of the media in some countries, not in the US.
Ange, it would have only been a couple of years ago, we would have been crossing over to you, having spent 7 years as our bureau correspondent over there. You've been in this situation. Take us there. It must be frightening.
Terrifying. I think the closest that we've seen recently was the Ferguson riots in Missouri in 2014. I was there then. Those protests erupted when a teenage boy, Michael Brown, was shot dead by a police officer. The police officer wasn't charged. The teenager was shot 6 times, including twice in the head. Those protests started out pretty peacefully as well, but they erupted. We flew into Ferguson, and Ferguson, the town was on fire. Buildings were burning. I remember being right in the middle of one of these riots, police firing tear gas into the crowd, the first time I ever experienced tear gas. And it's quite terrifying, and I feel for Amelia and Ash and Kadak because you're worried. There are so many guns in the US. So you're worried, could I get accidentally shot by one of these protesters that I'm standing beside, or am I going to get shot by one of the police officers? It's really, really terrifying. The difference with Ferguson, it was very intense there. The protests had lasted weeks, but we didn't see them across all of the cities the way we are seeing them now. After Ferguson, there was a big investigation into the police response and how they could have done it differently. And a lot of people at the time said they handled it badly because not just the initial incident, but afterwards, when people came out and wanted to voice their concern, instead of listening to them, it was very militarised. They came out with tear gas and rubber bullets, and it looked like they were going to war with their American citizens. And a lot of people who did that investigation then, the police that were there involved at the time, are saying, what has America learned? Because we're seeing all of that again playing out in cities right across the country. And I think this time, what's the difference? Why did it kick off across the US this time? I think the pandemic is obviously one thing, not just that people are restless, but if you're a Black American, you're more likely to get coronavirus because you're less likely to have a job where you can work from home. And if you get it, you're more likely to die from it because you're more likely to have the conditions that predispose you to dying from COVID. So then, of course, you've got the economic concerns. All of these people about to try and get welfare. There's a lot of concern here. And then, of course, you've got Donald Trump, who isn't calling for calm. He's using language that's really inflammatory to Black Americans, like talking about setting vicious dogs on them, which is very much like what happened during segregation.
Well, let's speak about the president now, because he made history yesterday. He walked across the lawns of the White House to the church. It's a decision criticised by many, calling it a presidential photo op. When maybe just, if you wanted to do this, maybe a moment of quiet reflection rather than clumsily holding up a Bible. The world has reacted to this. And what will it do now to the election?
Yeah, the world's looking at this with disbelief and disgust. The Washington Post has called it obscene that he would use the Bible as a political prop. And the fact that he cleared those protesters who were allowed to be there, the curfew wasn't even in place when they cleared them all through with rubber bullets and tear gas so he could walk across and do this and hold up the Bible like that. In terms of what it does for the election, that's the big question. You'd think that, how could this guy get elected again?
Well, they go to the polls in November.
In November. I spent a lot of time, obviously, on the campaign trail when he was elected the first time, talking to a lot of Trump supporters, and I would have to say, I don't think it's going to make any difference. If anything, the violence that we're seeing, the looting, his law and order approach will probably galvanise support from, because it's not the people on the street who are ever going to vote for Trump. And if anything, that's scaring his supporters. So if anything, it could actually improve his chances.
We saw it the first time around. That stuff appeals to his base, right? Yeah. Those who aren't protesting on the streets have taken to social media. There was so much happening on social media last night. You've been keeping an eye on it for us.
Yeah, I think this is one of those really small things that people feel like they can do around the world. The hashtag Blackout Tuesday has had over 26 million posts. It's not much to that, but that little black screen that's, as you scroll through your Instagram feed, that's what you're seeing everywhere. People are uploading that image in support of the protest. Some people have changed their profile pictures and online bios to reflect that. And of course, celebrities getting on board: Kim Kardashian, Kylie Jenner, Jennifer Aniston, Victoria Beckham, Hugh Jackman, Reese Witherspoon. They're all jumping on board. Yeah. Obviously, it's more important to vote rather than just post a black square on Instagram, but it's good to see the support.
And there's some controversy too, because people are putting the hashtag, though, Black Lives Matter, and in doing so, they actually ruined the feed because they wanted that Black Lives Matter to actually mean something with vision that was powerful, not just the black screen. So they asked people to change it to Blackout Tuesday.
Exactly.
Now, as we heard earlier, there were protests around the world, including in Sydney, just outside our studios.
Yeah, right, just out here in Sydney CBD in Martin Place. About 1,000 people turned up last night to show their support. They were waving Black Lives Matters banners. Thankfully, we of course did not see the sort of violence that we're seeing playing out in the US. It was very much a peaceful demonstration. It did take on a bit of added significance, given that we've seen that footage emerge of an Indigenous teenager here in Australia being pretty aggressively arrested by a New South Wales police officer. That's now, of course, under investigation. There were also some protests over in New Zealand. They prompted a scolding from the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, over there. She's obviously saying, she understands